Welcome. I'm Rosemary Ravenel, and this is Makeover Mondays, LinkedIn edition. This is a space that's devoted to helping you improve the way you show up on Zoom or whatever video platform you choose. It is the place where you'll meet people who are really expanding the limits of this rectangle that we're living in, people who are redefining virtual meetings. And my guest today is doing remarkable work helping executives shine during media interviews. Joel Staley is my guest, and I'm so excited about the conversation we're going to have. Joel is a 25-year veteran of media relations. He is multilingual, public relations expert, and he's trained executives and athletes and public figures, elected officials. His experience includes many industries, from sports to healthcare to financial services to travel and tourism. And I'll let Joel tell you a bit more about himself. We can explore what you need to know the next time you're asked to do a media interview and how you can ace it, not only in terms of the content, but how you show up. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate you introducing me to your audience. And so the only thing that I might add is that I've had the pleasure of doing media training and executive spokesperson training for some of the largest PR firms in the world, like Edelman, Burson Cohen Wolf, Hill & Knowlton, and others. But then also as a PR director at Disney Parks and Resorts for a few years. And so at each of those opportunities, I had the ability to participate as a part of a team of trainers that would fly around the world, if you will, and help people do a better job with media interviews. And so I hope I can share some of that with your audience today.
Well, we know that since March of last year, most of what we see on cable news, right, has now, people have migrated to home studios, right? Because going into a studio for an interview is pretty much a thing of the past. And even the actual anchors, right, and reporters were improvising, right, with this remote virtual video technology. And so it shifted the way people were accustomed to doing the interviews, both from the reporter side as well as from the subject or for the interviewee. How have you seen that whole dynamic change this past year?
Well, it was really interesting, and it so many different channels, whether it was the evening news with your traditional networks and cable, or whether it was specialty channels like even the tennis channel. I'm a tennis fan, so I watch that. And so in each of those scenarios,
I think Joel has frozen. We hope to get Joel back in just a second. I think what Joel is trying to say that in any of those scenarios that he was talking about, both sides, both the reporter, the media outlet, and the interviewee and the subject have had to really sort of do a dance around how they communicate. You might remember that even our top CNN, MSNBC, Fox anchors were doing it from their homes. You'll see Rachel Maddow, for example, or Chris Cuomo really doing the their evening newscast from home. So, Joel, are you back?
I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
I was tap dancing around you. I hope I did justice to what you were going to say.
I'm sure you were regular Ginger Rogers.
I want to remind people who are watching to please put their questions in the comments, and we will get to as many as possible. So please, Joel, I had asked you about the dynamic of the reporter, host, and the interviewee, how that has changed.
Yeah, well, I saw, you could see it play out. Some people were really very well prepared for these at-home studio interviews. They had fixed up their background, they had the technology down, and it seemed really polished and it seemed to go really well. Others struggled, obviously. And in the end, whatever is distracting from you delivering your message is not helpful. And so spending some time to get things right is always the wise choice. I think we've seen most people become very good at it now. If they have to appear regularly, they've worked out a lot of the kinks.
So if you were to advise, if I was your client and I was getting ready for an interview, let's say on Good Morning America, how would you advise me to prepare, let's say, before we get into messaging and of course, and all of that very important strategic work, my physical space? How should I prepare given that this is not a television studio, what are some of the basics that you would counsel your clients to watch for?
Yeah, I would say one, pick a controlled space. So many of these early interviews, you saw, somebody walking into the background or a pet or something like that would really distract. Even a gentleman that was doing a live interview on nightly network news, and his cute, handsome little son ran across the background, and you're like, oh no, it's not the kid's fault. He was 2 or 3 years old. So the point is, find a controlled space, close the door, talk to people that are at home with you and say, hey, I'm going to be doing this at X time and Y hour. So please, give me some space and don't come in when I'm doing this. And so that's one, controlled space. I would say two, once you feel like you're easily in control of the space and what's going to come in and out of it, take a look at the background. Take a look at what's behind you and make sure that it's compatible and consistent with your personal brand or the brand that you are representing. And if it's not, clean it up, get it in shape, make it look the way that you want it to, be purposeful. And then finally, I think what's really important is the lighting. Take care to set up both your camera and your lighting at an angle that's going to be flattering for you. Most people who are experts in this field will recommend that you put the camera about eye level, maybe just a little bit above eye level.
Right.
And then the same for lighting. That helps get a flattering angle of your face. It helps avoid shadows on your face. And those are going to make it again easier for your viewer to focus on your message and not the hiccups.
Right. And in terms of any other microphones, webcams, a integrated microphone versus freestanding, any of those tips that you think are essential for the spokesperson to come across properly?
Yeah, audio quality is really important. And so most laptops will have kind of a condenser mic that's built into the laptop. Most people are using laptops for these types of things. And the sound's just not great. I mean, it sounds cheap. It sounds hollow. It sounds tinny. So for just a few dollars, I mean, less than 100, you can buy a freestanding microphone with a USB plug-in. So it's super simple. The technology is really easy, and it will give you great sound, almost near, audio studio quality sound. And it doesn't take much of an effort. So I totally recommend investing in a nice microphone. I think that helps tremendously.
Great, great. I think one of the ways that we can learn in a nutshell some of your best advice is if you give us some of the things that didn't work. I mean, I'd like to give you two questions. One
Sure.
is, what was like the biggest success you had with a training and with a client? And then what was the biggest bust? Fair?
Biggest success and biggest bust. Oh man. Well, the biggest success, there was an occasion when I was working with the Mexico Tourism Board, and I was helping them during a time when there was a lot of border crises. And so that was distracting from the fabulous destinations that they have, which are actually very safe and just very inviting and welcoming. And so I was working with the Secretary of Tourism, which is a cabinet level position in the government of Mexico, and helping her prepare for an interview with Jorge Ramos of Univision. And so this guy, I mean, I liken him to the 60 Minutes Mike Wallace of Latin America. I mean, he's tough.
Yes,
And
he
so
is.
the biggest success I had was helping her understand how to take those difficult topics and work in her messages in a way that calmed fears and allowed her to talk about the positives of the great destinations that the country had. And she's a great student. The secretary was. She did a fabulous job. And even after the interview was over, Jorge, he congratulated her. He says, "I hit you with everything I had. You did a fabulous job." So that was probably the biggest success I had. In terms of the biggest bust, one time I was helping a client prepare for an interview. It was a radio interview with Tropical Currents, which is a radio show in South Florida. Public radio is the NPR station down there. And I asked the producer, I said, so my client's going to come on and he's going to talk about, the economy and about an economic report that his organization has published. Tell me, is it just him and the interviewer? That's all that's going to be on the call? Oh yeah, it's going to be fine. That wasn't true. And so in addition to him being on the call, we also had an attorney for the opposition organization on the call. And they allowed guests to call in and ask questions. And it really, really threw my client off. I felt terrible. I thought I had prepared him. I thought I was putting him into a position where he was going to do really well. And it turned out to be just the opposite. And I felt awful. And I vowed never to work with that producer again.
Yeah.
But I think the lesson that I learned was maybe I was a little too trusting. You have to really make sure that you know what the situation is that you're putting your client into in terms of the interview.
Right. You have to know the media outlet. You have to know the interviewer, right? You have to do a lot of research ahead of time to know what kind of environment that interview will unfold in, right? It says there's a lot of pre-work that has to be done.
Absolutely.
Give us sort of the digest. I mean, there's sort of cardinal rules that the do's and don'ts. And I know that at the end, you're going to give us your best tips. But if you could give us sort of the what you need to know about successful media relations.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I could tell executives is don't go it alone. Oftentimes, they're approached by a reporter. Now, not so much this past year because of COVID, but they're approached by reporters at an event or at some place that is not a, quote, formal interview setting. And, hey, answer a few questions for me. Let's talk off the cuff. Or they'll get a call. I'm on deadline. I need to talk. Can you just give me 2 minutes right now? And my best advice would be never, never, never do that. Always say, you know what? I'm so interested in speaking with you. Very flattered you'd want to. And I do want to take time to interview you. I don't have time now. Let's please, contact my assistant and let's get something organized, get something on the calendar soon. And the reason that you want to do that is because you can't step into a situation blindly. You don't know what the angle is, really. You don't know what the subtext is. I mean, on the surface, it could be about topic A, but really it's about these underlying issues. And if you're not aware of the nuances, you could get in real trouble. And you could do damage to your personal brand or to your organization's brand by not answering well. And then finally, you don't know the other sources that this particular interviewer has spoken to and how they might have biased the interviewer's frame of mind when it comes to the issue that you're going to be interviewed. So all of those things, your communications team is paid to figure out beforehand. Work with them, lean on them, get them to do that homework and prepare you. And then when you step into that interview situation, you know the situation that you're stepping into and you're prepared with your messaging. You can hit a home run, but don't chance it. It's just not worth it.
What about that always famous question, off the record? Can something actually be off the record?
In my book and the training that I give my clients, it doesn't exist. I tell them, don't say anything that you don't want to be on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow. Essentially, we're always on the record. And in many cases, a reporter, I mean, you may think to yourself, I have a trusted relationship with this reporter. I've done several interviews with them. Surely if they say off the record, they mean it and they'll keep their word. And they may, but what happens is they'll take whatever you give them, quote, off the record, and then they'll go to the other person and say, hey, I have it from a good source, a credible source that you have done X, Y, and Z. And so I want to know about that. And then the other person feels compelled, like, well, they've got me. I have to talk about this now. And then that topic that you thought you were off the record on, that was never going to make it into the news, it was just background. There it is, headlines. Don't do it.
Exactly. And yeah, people don't, I mean, it's, there is no such thing, right? As off the record, as well as, these ambush walking down the street, iPhone in your face. What do you think about something? I mean, that we see this with elected officials every day, just about. And sometimes they say things that they regret, but they can't take it back. They can't walk it back.
It's out there. Something that I tell my clients is that be very, very careful. You're always on message. And I'll give a great example. In 2012, Mitt Romney was running for the presidency against a very popular incumbent, President Obama. And he was doing well. He was competing. And then he had a fundraiser just up the road from you there, Rosemary, in Boca Raton.
Yep.
And at this fundraiser, he took great lengths to ensure that there were no media there. And so he was giving a speech, and he remarked in the speech something about, I don't have to worry about 47% of the people because I know they're not going to vote for me anyway. Somebody had their smartphone. Of course they did. We all walk around with them all the time, 24/7. Right. They recorded that. It ended up on YouTube. And then the mainstream media saw it on YouTube and social media, and they picked it up and did a broader story about it. A lot of experts who follow political campaigns look back at that and say that very well may have been when he lost the election.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think that historically was the trigger to his downfall. Yeah. What about nerves? People, particularly those who are not as experienced, and this happens in the corporate world, when someone's designated as a spokesperson and they freeze up. How do you work with people who have stage fright?
It happens. It happens to the best of us. There's an old broadcaster, and in fact, there's an award named after him, Edward R. Murrow. You're probably familiar, Rosemary. In any case, he famously said, everybody gets butterflies. The difference between the pros and the amateurs is that the pros know how to make their butterflies fly in formation.
That's a great quote, isn't it?
It is. And what I take that to mean is that butterflies are good. They keep you on your toes. They help you prepare.
Yeah.
But there's the key word, prepare. The more you rehearse, the more that you become familiar and absolutely master the message that you're going to give, the more confident you are. And the less you think about the words and the more you think about reading your audience, the more you think about your delivery and doing it well. And then the nerves seem to dissipate. So that's my guidance and counsel always is rehearse, practice in front of the mirror, practice, use your phone to record yourself and look back at the playback and see how you're doing. Rehearse in front of a trusted friend who can give you a good critique. And sometimes executives will complain and say, Joel, gee, I don't want to sound scripted. Are you kidding me? Okay, have you ever been to a Broadway play or a Broadway musical? And they sound fabulous. And emotionally, it reaches you. And in some cases, you walk out of such a performance thinking, gee, my mind has changed on a particular issue. Or you even feel inspired. Guess what? It was all scripted. Well, the reason why it reaches us and is effective is because they know it really well and their delivery is fabulous. Mm-hmm. So they've mastered the message and they were able to concentrate on the delivery and their performance. That's the same thing that those who are interviewed by the media ought to do. And they'll look much better. The nerves will go away. They'll be very confident.
Excellent. I want to remind people who are watching that you can post your comments and questions, and we will get to them right away. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go to Susan, who has actually a comment. She says, I worked in law enforcement, in a law enforcement agency, and we were always advised that nothing is off the record. Susan, thank you for reinforcing that point. It is, nothing ever is. I mean, in terms of the legal implications, right, as well. I mean, everything you say is fair game. Everything
it truly is. And something else that's important that's related to that is that in many cases, you may think to yourself, well, I'm not the main spokesperson. I'm a spokesperson. Or even somebody who's not a spokesperson, but is a leader within an organization. Be careful what you're saying on social media. Be careful what you casually say as you walk out. Media more and more are looking for that, who's behind the scenes, who's lower down the rung on the ladder than the CEO, because the CEO is going to tell me the party line. But I'll get the, quote, real story if I talk to this person who works in the trenches. So everybody has to be on message. Everybody has to really understand their brand story and deliver it as such.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about sound bites, because there's attention spans are so short. People don't have time to listen to long answers. And likely, if you give a long answer, it's going to be edited. So how can you safeguard that your message will be captured properly?
What I do is I work with my clients to sit down ahead of time and say, all right, if you were the editor or you were the producer and you had the ability to write your own headline, or you had the ability to write, say it's a magazine article, and you want that coveted breakout quote that's in the column just to the right of the text or to the left of the text, what would you write? What would it be? And we sit down together and we work out what that perfect quote would be. That's it's punchy, it's concise, it summarizes the zeitgeist of the moment, and it's emotional, it has an emotional appeal. And you're like, yeah, if they could publish this about me, how fabulous would it be? I would say, then great. You need to memorize that line, and you need to deliver it like 19 times during your interview. And if you do that, you improve the chances that that quote will be picked up and used. And by the way, media needs you to do that. They can't be long-winded. They need somebody to step up and in a concise way tell them what the gist of the story is. And when you do that for them, they love you. Thank you. That's my soundbite, and they run with it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's get to your your really proven tips, because we could continue talking for another half hour. This is such a rich subject, and still so many people in power still have missteps, right? They don't listen to people like you.
Yeah.
And they think they can go it alone. And this is such a vital thing for any company, small, large, multinational, public, private. It's essential that we as communicators learn how to maintain our own brand identity, right? Integral to what we stand for.
Yeah.
And so it's something we need to have as a discipline going forward. There are some tips that you want to share with our viewers, and we have them on the screen. And I'd like you to start with working with your team.
Yeah, for sure. I train all of my executives and spokespersons, work with your team. Like I was saying earlier, don't go it alone. They're fabulously talented people with a wealth of knowledge. Depend on them. Work with them to prepare so that your messaging is excellent and you're on point and you're prepared for whatever the reporter is going to throw at you. So that would be the first thing. Work with your team.
Okay.
Now, the next thing would be to, I can't believe if you've got it queued up the way I think, is know your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who am I talking to? What do they care about? You've got to realize it's not necessarily about you. Think back to the BP oil spill, April 2010, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gulf, it was a mess. Now, BP, when they stepped in, were actually doing not a bad job. But then there was that fated interview with Tony Hayward, who was the CEO, and he says, amongst many other great things that were totally on message, he says, I just want to get back to my life. Well, hey, we're the audience. We don't care about your life. We care about our lives. So know your audience. What do they care about? What are their values? What are the demographics that describe them? And make sure you tailor your message accordingly.
Right.
The next thing I would say is to be know your story. When I say know your story, I mean, I don't want you to memorize pages and pages of script. What I'm talking about is get your story down to 3 or 4 succinct messages that your audience can walk away with and go, yeah, I know what they're talking about. 3 or 4, and repeat them and work to get them into your answers with every answer that you give to the reporter. So know your story. And then know your purpose. And what do I mean by that? So many times we're sharing emails, or we have a leader that's making a presentation to the team or what have you. And then we walk away and we're like, they gave me a bunch of information, but I'm not sure what they want me to do with it. Here's the key. Whenever you communicate about anything in any environment, and especially a media interview, what do you want people to think, feel, or say, or do as a result of the communication you've just given them? You're influencing behavior. That's your purpose. And you need to have clearly in mind, what do I want them to do as a result of what I'm telling them right now? So make that an incredible part of what you, I guess I would rephrase that to say, make that the overarching framework within which you prepare whatever you're going to share in your messaging.
Right. So it speaks to intention, right? I mean, you have to have a clear that intention, and be consistent in everything, including your nonverbal, right? Because we've spoken about the words, but we've spoken about how you create your set now if we're looking at a virtual environment. But what about body language? What would you say about the importance of body language in underscoring that message?
It's incredibly important. They say it's an 80-20 proposition, 80% nonverbal, 20% verbal. And so one, make sure it's consistent, because people are looking for those cues. If what you're saying doesn't match with your body language, you're less believable, you're less credible. So be aware of how you're coming across. And that's where those rehearsals with video cameras can come in. You can say, oh, I didn't realize I was holding myself that way, or I was rolling my eyes at that point. So you have to be careful about those things. The idea is, just like you said, it should reinforce your message and not distract from it. One of the things that I help people do is help them understand how to use their hands. A lot of people don't know how to do that. Mm-hmm. And I use a baseball analogy. I say, you want to keep your hands in the strike zone. So your strike zone is kind of like from about here, your armpits, mm-hmm. and it goes down to your waist, and it's about right here. that rectangle, if you will, is where your hand should operate. The more you get outside of that, the more people are like, what is he doing with his hands? And then they forget what you're talking about. But the more that you stay in the strike zone and you use your hands effectively, you can count on your hands, 1, 2, 3. You can make gestures, you're pointing there. I mean, not like this in your face, of course, but just a simple hand gesture. All of these things can help emphasize your points. Be aware of your facial gestures. You don't want to do the big eye roll. Sometimes we just don't even realize we're doing it.
Yes.
Quick movements are probably not great. Again, the common denominator here is it distracts. So stay away from those things. Make it about your message, and you'll be much better off each time.
Great advice. With a crystal ball in front of you, do you see the media relations dynamic continuing to be virtual? Do you see that maybe a move towards going back in studio? How should we anticipate? Because some people I know, for example, have invested in improving their equipment, anticipating that they're conducting business, from their home offices. Do you think that this is a trend that will continue into the future?
I really wish I had a crystal ball and could tell the future, but I'll make an educated guess at it. I'll say that before the pandemic, we were trending towards this, and the pandemic accelerated the trend. So yes, I believe that it's going to continue to the future. We're going to continue to see remote interviews, video interviews, and the reason for that is because the news cycle has compressed, and it moves so rapidly now. They would prefer better quality. They would prefer in studio, but they don't have time. And so in order to scoop their competition, they've got to do it fast. So I think that element is going to continue to push us in the direction of remote interviews. And plus with the pandemic, people realized, they had to do it, but then they realized they could do it. And so they're going to keep doing it. They're not going to give that up. Now, I do see an important place for in-studio interviews. And I think that would probably likely be in situations in which you're doing more of a feature story. And it's maybe more of some sort of a news magazine that might be on air. But otherwise, they'll probably do remote interviews. And where they have time, they may send out a camera crew, especially if there's some interesting visuals to get on site wherever you are and wherever they might be reporting from. Right. But otherwise, it's here to stay. Count on it.
Interesting that you say that, there's been such a sort of flexibility with quality, right? Remember the times when there was a certain kind of quality, there was it was absolute. You could not submit to an interview that wasn't, the clearest sound, right, the sharpest picture, right? But those requirements have really just been stretched because of the necessity to grab the news where it's happening, however it's happening.
No, you're right, because in those time periods, they really were kind of on all of the networks and all of the competing news organizations were on the same footing when it came to timing. They were really using to compete with was quality. But then now that's been reversed. They realize people are willing to accept less of a quality if they can get the information first. And so now they're really competing with that foot forward instead.
Right. Which actually puts more of the onus on the spokesperson, on the source of the information, right? It's because there's more opportunity to tell our stories our own way. So I think that the field that you're in is just going to be blossoming with more opportunity. And in terms of training how we show up on video conferencing, that continues to be a need in order to guarantee our success as business leaders, as communicators, right? Because it can influence your career, your reputation, and many other things. So our time is nearly over. How can people get in touch with you, Joel? Because they have so much information to share.
Well, I would love it if they would visit my website where I write a blog about a lot of these topics. So that's jcs-communications.com. And then if they want to send me an email, it's joel@jcs-communications.com. And I'd love to hear from them. I really would. And I'm always on LinkedIn, so you can find me there.
Terrific, Joel. This has been absolutely wonderful. Great information. People can replay this on Facebook or LinkedIn, and I will have you back to give us more. I'd love to see in 6 months or so how the media relations landscape has changed. But I think there'll be much more opportunity for you to get people ready to take the stage.
I'd be flattered. You seem to have a great audience. If you trust me with them, I'm going to come on anytime you have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. And
Thanks
for those of you who are watching, and remember, go visit Joel. And if you want to find out how well you're doing on Zoom or whatever video conferencing platform you use, go to getyourzoomscore.com, which is my special site for you to take a quiz and to check your IQ based on 10 fundamental elements of successful video presence. Thank you for watching. I'll be back next week at noon, same station, and we will entertain your questions. My guest is going to be Suzanne Jewell, who is a mindfulness expert. She's going to be telling us how we can combat stage fright and come across as our very best on Zoom. Joel, thank you again. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.